Maybe a little tougher than I thought. Just a first note, it's $13,000 this year. There you go, Fairport. Oh, okay, I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to try and get through this. My name is Paul Barden and I am a cancer survivor. 1 year, 2 months, and 3 days ago, I was diagnosed with stage 3 colorectal cancer. I was 45 years old, in relatively good health, and had no family history of cancer. If you had told me 2 years ago that I would be standing before this crowd tonight talking about my experience as a cancer survivor, I would have thought you were crazy. Life is funny that way. Sadly, my story is not unique. 145,000 new cases of colorectal cancer are diagnosed each year in this country, and over 50,000 people die from it. Even more staggering is that 1,640,000 Americans are diagnosed with cancer each year, and nearly 580,000 die from it. But there is some good news. It is estimated that there are now more than 12 million survivors of cancer living today. So survivors, we are not alone. As you can imagine, my diagnosis came as quite a shock. My wife Maria and I were stunned. I wondered if I would see my teenage daughters. Jessica and Lindsay graduate from high school, much less from college. Would I be there to walk them down the aisle, to see them start their own families? Would I be around to celebrate my 25th wedding anniversary? Or to spend even one day in retirement? I could not sleep the first few nights following my diagnosis. On the second or third night of tossing and turning, I got out of bed in the middle of the night and went to the basement. I probably had what was the hardest cry of my entire journey. The reality of what I was facing, including the very real possibility that I might not survive, had sunk in. I was dazed, confused, horrified, angry, sad, concerned, and yes, scared. I had a very long conversation with God that night, but by morning I had come to terms with my situation, and I was at peace. I knew what I had to do, and I was bound and determined to make something good out of this nightmare. With my self-pity party behind me, I was now ready to go after this disease head-on. The first thing I decided I needed to do was to let the world know about my situation. I sat down at the computer and sent out an email to everyone I know. I realized that many cancer patients choose to fight their disease privately and discreetly, but I just couldn't envision trying to hide this from my family, friends, and colleagues. Besides which, I had faith that people would rally behind me and my family in our time of need. And man, did they ever. By the end of the weekend, I had received hundreds of emails and phone calls of support. I had my diagnosis, and I now had my support network. I was ready to roll up my sleeves and kick cancer's butt. From the very beginning, I felt that it has been my responsibility to let others learn from my situation. For that, we need to step back a bit so I can explain how my diagnosis came to be. Around the Thanksgiving and into the Christmas holidays of 2010, I began to notice subtle changes in more frequent bowel movements. Now, I know that this is a subject that no one wants to talk about, and as a tough guy and a former paratrooper, this is about the last thing on earth I want to go to talk to my doctor about. So in typical male fashion, I did not go to my doctor, and instead wished it away as a bad dietary habit from the holidays, and assumed all would return to normal in January. Of course, things did not return to normal. So I finally mustered up the courage to tell my doctor I was pooping too much. Well, I saw my doctor in mid-January, received the obligatory blue glove digital exam, and was informed that all appeared normal, that there was no blood in the stool, and I was preliminary diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome. Dietary changes were recommended with follow-up in 3 to 6 months. Having done some internet research prior to the appointment, I asked about having a colonoscopy. The response was, "Oh no, you don't need that. You are only 45 years old. There is no reason to suspect colorectal cancer, especially since you have no family history and there is no blood in the stool. Let's try the dietary changes first and go from there." I had a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right and was unwilling to believe that it was simply a dietary issue. Thankfully, I have insurance that does not require a primary care referral, so I set out to find my own gastroenterologist. I got in to see the GI doc shortly thereafter and had my colonoscopy on March 16th. The rest, as they say, is history. Ultimately, my cancer was diagnosed as stage 3C, as close to stage 4 metastatic disease as you can get. Had I followed my primary doc's advice, there is a very good chance I would not be standing here today. My lesson here is obvious. You know your body better than anyone. If you have something going on that feels out of the ordinary or just doesn't feel right, go to the doctor and demand an evaluation. If not satisfied, keep pushing. To do otherwise really can be the difference between life and death. Once I had a diagnosis, we set out to decide on treatment options. We ultimately settled on a combination of team of doctors from Wilmot Cancer Center and Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. Because my tumor was so low in my colon and the very top of my rectum, there was substantial concern about losing all bowel function, not to mention other functions whose nerve endings all pass through that area of my body. The real threat of incontinence and impotence played very heavily on my mind. I chose a surgeon at Johns Hopkins with impeccable credentials to perform this type of delicate procedure. Before any surgery, though, my first phase of treatment included 5 weeks of everyday, Monday through Friday, radiation treatments with pill-form chemotherapy. The goal was to shrink the tumor size to increase the chances for a successful surgery. The radiation burst lasted only a few minutes. And I remember during the entire time I was being zapped in that dark room, I envisioned all these little radioactive cells and armors and swords attacking out on those little cancer cells. I think on more than one occasion I may have even yelled out, cheering the good guys on. After about a month of rest and recovery, I was off to Johns Hopkins for surgery, but not before getting through the Fairport soccer tournament. As one of its committee members, I had responsibilities and duties that allowed me to focus on something other than my impending surgery. I am quite certain this drove my wife nuts, but we literally walked off the field, got in the car, and headed to Baltimore. Thanks to all you soccer guys, and you know who you are, for breaking down the tournament without me.